The moving truck overturned on the dirt road's curve, and Helen knew her life had just started over. The blue dress she'd chosen to make a good first impression was streaked with red dust. Her scraped knee bled through her torn stockings, and the 2 suitcases she'd brought from Chicago lay scattered on the ground like broken promises. But it was in this disheveled, wounded state that she appeared on the porch of Willow Creek Farm, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. The tall man in a cowboy hat stopped feeding the chickens and looked at her. For a moment, that felt like an eternity. Helen thought he'd send her away. After all, what kind of mail-order bride shows up looking like a drifter? But then James Perry, 52, widowed for 7 years, took 3 steps toward her and said, in a voice that cut through the quiet of the farmyard like a knife, "Here, nobody lays a hand on you." His words echoed across the farm. Mrs. Carmen, tending the vegetable garden, dropped her watering can. Mr. Tony, the farm manager, took off his hat. Young Rose, who helped in the kitchen, peeked out the window, eyes wide, and whispers began to spread through the countryside like wind before a storm. A mail-order bride had arrived, battered by the journey, welcomed by a farmer who protected everything he nurtured, except his own heart. Helen didn't know whether to cry or give thanks. The letter she'd received 3 months ago in Chicago had been formal, polite, but lacked warmth. "I accept your marriage proposal. The farm needs a woman to manage the household. So I hope you're kind-hearted and hard-working. Signed, James." She'd sold her small apartment after her divorce, gathered her savings, and bought a one-way bus ticket to rural Kentucky. She had nothing left in Chicago anyway. No family, no steady job, no hope. But now, standing on the wooden porch in her dirty dress, tears drying on her face, Helen felt something she hadn't in years. She was being protected. This serious man with tired but steady eyes had made a promise in public. In the country, a man's word carried more weight than a signed contract. "Let's clean up those scrapes," James said, and for the first time since stepping off the bus in town, Helen breathed a sigh of relief. The house was bigger than she'd imagined. A wide porch, a spacious living room with antique furniture, a large kitchen with a wood-burning stove, and a solid oak table that could easily seat 12. Everything was clean but had the stark feel of a bachelor's home. Functional, no flowers, no colorful curtains, no feminine touch to make it a home. "Your room's back here," James said, showing her a simple bedroom with a single bed, a wooden wardrobe, and a window overlooking the orchard. "Mine's on the other side of the house. Don't worry, I won't bother you. Our marriage will be legal and in church, but we'll keep our space until you're ready." Helen nodded, grateful for his kindness. James wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something calming about him. Maybe it was the way he spoke, slow and deliberate, or the way he looked at her without judgment even in her disarray. "Tomorrow, I'll introduce you to the farmhands and neighbors. Today, rest, settle in, and if you want to join me for dinner, Rose has it ready at 6. When he left and closed the door, Helen collapsed onto the bed and cried. She cried from relief, fear, exhaustion, and hope. For the first time in months, she felt she might not be entirely alone in the world. Dinner was quiet but not awkward. James asked about her trip, if she was feeling better, if she needed anything. Helen asked about the farm, the crops, the routine. Small talk between 2 people who'd known each other for 3 hours but were set to spend their lives together. "You know it's different out here, right?" he said, spooning more mashed potatoes onto her plate. "Life's slower, simpler. We rise with the sun, sleep early. The work's hard but rewarding. And the neighbors? Well, they have opinions about everything." "I'm ready," Helen lied. She wasn't ready for anything, but she was willing to learn. The first week passed like a strange dream. Helen woke to the sound of country music on the kitchen radio, the kettle hissing on the wood stove, and bells calling the workers to the fields. Rose, a 20-year-old with a shy demeanor but an easy smile, helped her learn the household routine. "Mrs. Helen, are you going to the farmer's market on Sunday?" Rose asked on Friday as they scrubbed the stove. "Everyone will be there. It's the best place to meet folks around here." Helen hesitated. She knew she'd be watched, judged, scrutinized, but she also knew she couldn't hide forever. "I'll go. I need to buy fabric for new curtains for the living room." Rose grinned. "It'll look nice. This house could use a woman's touch." On Sunday, Helen chose a simple dress, tied her hair in a low bun, and followed James to the market in town. The place was bustling, people greeting each other, kids running between stalls, the air thick with the scent of fresh cheese and molasses candy. That's where she met Mrs. Abigail, the most influential woman in the area. Elegant, even in plain clothes, owner of a thriving farm and a tongue sharper than a razor, she ruled market conversations like a queen in her court. "So you're James's bride," Mrs. Abigail said, eyeing Helen up and down. "Good to see he found someone to keep house." "A man alone can't manage." Her tone was polite, but Helen caught the chill behind it. She smiled and replied, "Pleasure to meet you. James spoke highly of you. I hope you settle in well. Country life's not easy, especially for city girls." Mrs. Abigail's smile didn't reach her eyes. "But I'm sure you'll manage." The exchange was courteous, but Helen knew she was being tested, and from the way other women watched, she realized Mrs. Abigail's approval was key to being accepted in the community. On the drive home, James was quieter than usual. "Don't mind Mrs. Abigail," he said finally. "She's a good person but likes to control everything. It'll take time for her to warm up to you." "What if she never does?" James stopped the truck at the farm gate and looked at her. "Then she'll have to deal with it. You're my wife, and this is your home." The courthouse wedding was simple. No reception, just Mr. Tony and Rose as witnesses. Helen wore a modest white dress she'd bought in town. James wore the suit he kept for special occasions. They exchanged plain rings, signed the papers, and that was it. They were married. But Helen knew the real test was just beginning. In the weeks that followed, she threw herself into learning every corner of the farm. She woke early, helped Rose in the kitchen, tended the garden, and organized the house. She discovered James was a man of few words but many kindnesses. He left wildflowers from the orchard on the kitchen table, checked on her well-being, and respected her space. But she also noticed other things. The way he grew quiet when the end-of-month bills arrived. The way Mr. Tony whispered worriedly about low crop prices. The way James sometimes stood on the porch, staring at the horizon with a sadness he hid from everyone. It was while organizing the pantry that Helen found the ledger, tucked in the back of a drawer tied with twine. Her heart raced as she opened it. Red numbers, old debts, overdue bills. The farm was in serious trouble, and no one had told her. That night, after dinner, Helen found her courage. "James, we need to talk." He looked up from his newspaper. "About what?" "About the farm situation. I found the ledger." His face darkened. "You shouldn't have gone through that. I'm your wife. This house's problems are my problems too." "They're not." James stood, irritated. "This is my responsibility. Always has been, always will be. You take care of the house, I handle the rest." "But James..." "The matter's closed, Helen." It was their first fight, and it hurt more than Helen expected, because she realized James was protecting her not just from others, but from the truth, and she didn't want to be protected. She wanted to be a partner. The next morning, James left early for work and didn't return until lunch. The air was tense, their meal silent. Then Mr. Tony appeared at the kitchen door, looking grim. "Mrs. Helen, could you step outside for a moment?" Helen followed him to the porch. Rose was there, eyes red from crying. "What's wrong?" Helen asked, worried. "There's talk in town," Mr. Tony said, uneasy. "They're saying you showed up out of nowhere, no family, no one knows who you really are." Helen felt the world spin. "So what? So out here, reputation's worth more than money, Mrs. Helen. If folks start talking bad about you..." "They're talking bad about me too," James's voice cut in from behind. He'd arrived unnoticed, his face dark as a storm. "Mr. Tony, gather everyone on the farm to the porch, now." "But boss, now." Within 5 minutes, every farmhand was assembled. James climbed the porch steps, took off his hat and spoke loud enough for all to hear. "Let's make one thing clear. Helen is my wife. This is her home. If anyone, on or off this farm, speaks ill of her, they'll answer to me. Because what I said the day she arrived, I'll say again. No one touches her without going through me first." The silence that followed was absolute. Helen's heart pounded so hard, she was sure everyone could hear it. James's public defense both calmed and worried her. Some would see it as loyalty, others as stubbornness. "Go back to work," James said. As the crowd dispersed, he turned to Helen. "Don't pay attention to gossip. People with nothing to do make up stories." "But James, what if this hurts the farm? What if people stop doing business with you because of me?" "Then they stop." He put his hat back on. "I didn't build this place to live begging for permission to be happy." The word happy echoed in Helen's mind for days. Was James happy with her? Or was he just being stubborn, protecting his wounded pride? The answer came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Helen was in the garden trying to save wilting tomato plants when she heard raised voices from the house. She ran to see what was happening and found James arguing with a well-dressed man she didn't recognize. "No deal," the man was saying. "That's the price, take it or leave it." "It's too low, Mr. Andrews," James replied. "It doesn't even cover costs." "Then sell to someone else." The man smirked. "Oh, wait. There's no one else, is there?" Helen saw James's jaw tighten. "There is." "No, there isn't. And you know why? Your reputation's taking a hit. This mail-order bride business, a wife no one knows. Folks are suspicious." That's when Helen understood the stakes. Her marriage wasn't just affecting James's personal life, it was threatening the entire farm. The man left without a deal, and James stood in the living room, hands in his pockets, staring into space. "It's because of me," Helen said softly. "It's not. It is. I'm ruining your life." James turned to her, and for the first time, Helen saw anger in his eyes. Not at her, but at the situation, the unfairness of having to choose between love and survival. "You're not ruining anything. It's these small-minded people with nothing better to do. But if the farm goes under because of me, it won't." His voice was harsher than intended. "This land is mine, was my father's, my grandfather's. No one's taking it from me." Helen wanted to believe him, but the red numbers in the ledger haunted her. She knew, with the painful clarity of someone who'd lost everything once before, that sometimes love isn't enough to save what matters most. That night, for the first time since arriving, Helen couldn't sleep. She lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the house's creaks, wondering if it might be better to leave before she destroyed the life of the man she'd come to love. Because that was the truth. In 2 months of marriage, Helen had fallen for James Perry, for the way he tended his crops like they were his children, for his quiet kindness, for his fierce determination to protect what was his, and especially for the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, like she was a miracle that might vanish. But miracles, Helen knew, sometimes cost too much. She had to decide, stay and fight for her place, risking everything James had built, or leave, protecting the man she loved from her own presence. The answer came with the first ray of sunlight through her window. Helen got up, washed her face, tied her hair back, and marched to the kitchen with a resolve she hadn't felt in months. If she was staying, and she was, she'd prove she belonged, not just to the community, but to James. Rose was already brewing coffee when Helen walked in. "Morning, Mrs. Helen. Sleep well?" "I did," Helen lied, pouring herself a cup. "Rose, tell me something. What sold well at the market back when the farm was doing better?" Rose stopped stirring the oatmeal and looked at her curiously. "Well, James's first wife, Maggie, used to make these herb-seasoned cheeses that flew off the table. And her peach preserves with pecans. Folks fought over those. Why do you ask?" Helen sipped the strong coffee, feeling courage rise in her chest. "Because we're bringing them back." "But Mrs. Helen, Mr. Tony always says a farm's not a grocery store." "Mr. Tony hasn't seen the red numbers I have." Helen set her cup down firmly. "If we want to save this land, we need to think differently." James walked into the kitchen then, dressed for work, hat in hand. "Morning," he said, more serious than usual. The previous night's argument still hung between them. "James, I need to talk to you," Helen said, taking a deep breath. He hesitated, bracing for another tough conversation. "Go ahead. I'm staying. But I'm staying my way." She stood, meeting his eyes. "I don't want to be protected. I want to be a partner, for real." "Helen, let me finish." She raised a hand. "I know how to do things. I can cook, organize, talk to people, and I know this farm needs money, so let me help." James was silent for a long moment. "How?" "Specialty cheeses, preserves, homemade pies, things that add value, that sell better at the market. This farm's not a bakery, Helen. A bankrupt farm won't feed anyone either." Her words were sharper than intended, but they were true. "Give me a chance, just one." James looked at her, then at Rose, who pretended to be engrossed in the oatmeal. He sighed. All right, but if it flops, it won't. Helen smiled for the first time in days. Trust me. The first step was winning over Mr. Tony. Helen knew the farm manager was key to any change, and he was naturally skeptical. She found him in the barn organizing tools. "Mr. Tony, can we talk?" He glanced at her over his glasses. "Yes, Mrs. Helen. I want to start making cheeses and preserves to sell at the market. I need your help." His face hardened. "With all due respect, a farm's a farm, not a jam factory. Have you seen last month's books?" "I have." "Then you know we're in trouble." Helen crossed her arms. "I'm not trying to change the farm's heart. I just want to use what we've got better." Mr. Tony sighed. "What do you need from me?" "Help fixing up that old greenhouse behind the house and space in the pantry for cheese aging." He thought it over, then nodded. "Fine, but if it goes south, it's on you." "Deal." It took 3 weeks to get everything ready. Helen woke before dawn, managed the house, helped with milking, and spent afternoons in the refurbished greenhouse testing recipes. Rose became her eager partner, jotting down measurements, suggesting spices, tasting every batch. "Mrs. Helen, this herbed cheese is amazing," Rose said, trying a slice. "And the fig preserves. Better than Maggie's, I swear." "You think so?" "I know so. My grandma always said the difference between good food and great food is the love you put in." Helen smiled. Love was something she wasn't short on. Every cheese she made, every jar of preserves she stirred, was for James, the farm, and the future they could build together. Not everyone saw it that way, though. The first resistance came from home. James walked in one afternoon to find the kitchen smelling of cloves and cinnamon, pots simmering, Helen and Rose working like bees. "What's this mess?" he asked. "It's not a mess," Helen said, stirring a pot. "It's work. My kitchen's a factory now." Helen stopped and faced him. "It's the place where your wife is trying to save your legacy." It was a tough argument. James grumbled about the smell, the clutter, the time Helen spent on this stuff instead of running the house properly. Helen shot back that she was running the house, her way. The conversation ended with them sleeping back to back, the air heavy as a storm cloud. The next morning, Helen woke determined. She prepared a tray with fresh herbed cheese, peach pecan preserves, and warm cornbread. She brought it to James, who was drinking coffee on the porch. "Try it," she said, setting the tray down. "Helen, just try it. If you don't like it, I'll stop everything." James looked at the tray, then at her. He sighed, cut a piece of cheese, spread preserves on the cornbread, and took a bite. His face changed instantly. "It's good," he admitted grudgingly. "Just good?" He ate another bite, slower. "It's really good." Helen sat beside him on the porch. "James, I don't want to change who you are or what this farm means. I just want to help my way." He stared at the horizon where the sun was warming the fields. "My first wife, Maggie, used to make preserves too," he said finally. "Stopped when she got sick. After she passed, I didn't want anyone touching that stuff. Felt like, I don't know, betrayal." Helen's heart tightened. "And now?" "Now I think Maggie would be mad if I let the farm go under out of pride." The real test came at the next Sunday market. Helen prepared a small batch, 6 herbed cheeses, 4 jars of preserves, and 2 cornbread loaves. James loaded everything into the truck without complaint, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "What if nothing sells?" Helen asked, nervous as they set up the stall. "It'll sell," Rose said confidently. "You'll see." The morning started slow. People passed, looked, greeted, but didn't buy. Helen felt despair creeping in when an older woman with grey hair stopped at the stall. "Is this your cheese, dear?" the woman asked. "Yes, ma'am. Want to try some?" The woman tasted a slice, chewed thoughtfully and nodded. "It's good, I'll take 2. It was like breaking a dam. Within 2 hours, Helen had sold nearly everything. Women tried the cheese, loved it, bought it, and chatted among themselves. The herbed cheese was a hit, but the cinnamon fig preserves vanished from the stall. "Will you bring more of those preserves next week?" asked Mrs. Rose, the pharmacist's wife. "My husband went crazy for them." "I will," Helen promised, beaming. Then Mrs. Abigail appeared. Helen's stomach dropped. The region's most influential woman eyed the remaining products with her unreadable expression. "So, you've turned merchant?" Mrs. Abigail said, sampling a piece of cheese. "I'm helping the farm's income," Helen replied, keeping her voice steady. Mrs. Abigail chewed slowly, thoughtfully. It's tasty, she admitted. Very tasty. Helen braced for the but. It didn't come. I'll take 2 cheeses, Mrs. Abigail said, pulling cash from her purse, and a jar of the peach preserves. Helen could hardly believe it. She'd sold to Mrs. Abigail. But the bigger surprise came later, when she overheard Mrs. Abigail talking to a friend. Talent doesn't buy reputation, but it shows the girl's not just here to coast. The comment stung, but Helen focused on the positive. Mrs. Abigail had publicly acknowledged her skill. It was a start. On the drive home, James was more cheerful than she'd seen in weeks. How much did we make? He asked. Helen showed him the cash. $150. In one morning? In one morning. James nodded, impressed. Not bad for a start. Not bad at all, Helen agreed, smiling. The market's success brought new challenges. Helen needed to produce more, but the kitchen couldn't handle it. That's when she had a game-changing idea. What if we turn that old shed next to the house into a small dairy? She suggested to James. Nothing fancy, just a proper space for cheeses and preserves. James hesitated. That'll cost money we don't have. It'll cost less than losing the farm. The renovation was done gradually, with Mr. Tony and 2 farmhands helping. Helen sold a gold bracelet her mother had given her to buy the tiles needed. James didn't know about the bracelet, and she preferred it that way. Meanwhile, market sales grew weekly. Helen started taking orders, catering small local events. The income helped cover urgent bills. But not everything was smooth. One afternoon, Helen was in the new dairy preparing a batch of cheeses when she heard voices on the porch. It was a man she didn't know talking to James. I've reconsidered our talk from last week, the man said. I can bump up the price for your crops a bit. Helen recognized the voice. Mr. Andrews, the buyer who'd humiliated James weeks ago. How much? James asked, wary. 10% more. But I want exclusivity, and you need to stop this nonsense of selling pies at the market. A real farmer doesn't play baker. Helen's blood boiled. She stepped out of the dairy and onto the porch. Good afternoon, she said, polite but firm. Mr. Andrews glanced at her like she was an annoying fly. You must be the wife? Pleasure. The pleasure's mine, Helen lied. I overheard you talking business. Can I join? No need, James said quickly. It's men's business. It's money business, Helen corrected. And this house's money concerns me. Mr. Andrews laughed humorlessly. Feisty wife, James can't even keep her in check. That was the last straw. Helen stepped toward him. You can leave my property, now. Helen, James started. Now, she repeated, staring Mr. Andrews down. And if you come back to humiliate my husband, you'll deal with me first. Mr. Andrews turned red with anger. James, either you put your wife in her place or we're done. Then we're done, James said, stunning everyone, including Helen. Because disrespecting my wife is disrespecting me. Mr. Andrews stormed off, vowing James would regret it. When he was gone, Helen and James were left alone on the porch. You just lost your only buyer because of me, Helen said, worried. I lost a buyer who disrespected us, James corrected. That's something I won't tolerate. Helen felt warmth spread through her chest. What now? How will we sell the crops? We'll figure it out, James said, pulling her close. We always do. That night, for the first time since their wedding, James kissed Helen. A shy, careful kiss, like testing new ground, but it was enough for her to know something fundamental had shifted between them. Helen, he whispered, pressing his forehead to hers. I know, she said before he could finish. They didn't make love that night, but they slept in each other's arms for the first time, and Helen felt she'd finally found her place in the world. The problem was, the world wasn't ready to let her keep it. The next morning, Rose came into the kitchen looking troubled. Mrs. Helen, there's ugly gossip in town, she said quietly. What kind? They're saying you've bewitched James. That because of you, he's losing money and friends, that the farm's going under because of you. Helen felt dizzy. Who's spreading this? I don't know, but everyone's talking. Mr. Tony brought worse news at lunch, taking off his hat and scratching his head, his tell for bad news. Boss, I gotta tell you something, he said, uneasy. Spit it out, James said. The rural co-op's holding a meeting to discuss, well, whether you should stay a member. What? Helen said, outraged. They say you're changing too much, not following tradition. It's giving the co-op a bad look. James was silent for a long moment. When's the meeting? Next Friday, at the community hall. Then I'll be there, James said, and I'm bringing Helen. James, I don't have to go, Helen said. I can stay home. No, you're coming. He stood from the table. If they want to judge my wife, they'll do it to her face. A man who hides behind gossip isn't a man. Helen looked at her husband, her true husband now, and felt a mix of pride and fear. Pride that he'd face the whole community for her. Fear that this meeting could decide their future. She had no idea how to prepare for a battle that might determine whether she truly belonged in the place she'd learned to call home. The week before the co-op meeting dragged like a slow-motion film. Helen woke in the middle of the night, prepared cheeses and preserves with trembling hands, and pretended everything was fine, but it wasn't. Tension colored every conversation, glance, and silence in the house. On Wednesday, 3 days before the meeting, Helen woke with a strange feeling. The silence felt heavier. She stepped onto the porch and saw James standing in the yard, staring at the horizon with an expression she'd never seen. "What's wrong?" she asked, approaching. "It rained last night," he said, his voice odd. "But not enough." Helen looked at the sky. The clouds were heavy but scattered. "Will it rain more?" "Don't know. Radio says maybe, maybe not." James sighed. "If we don't get real rain this week, we'll lose half the crop." It was like the world collapsed at once. The co-op meeting, the gossip, and now a drought. Helen sat on the porch steps, head in her hands. "It's too much," she whispered. "Too much to handle." James sat beside her. "Helen, if you want to walk away, I'll understand. It's not fair for you to go through this." She looked up at him. "Do you want me to leave? I want you to be happy. Then stop talking nonsense." Helen stood, a sudden resolve in her. "Because I'm fighting. For you, for this farm, for us. If these people want a war, they'll get one." James smiled for the first time in days. "And how do you plan to fight a drought in the whole community?" "One thing at a time," Helen said. "First, we fix the water problem." Helen spent the morning touring the farm with Mr. Tony, searching for water sources. In a rarely visited corner of the property, she found what she was looking for. "Mr. Tony, has this spring always been this strong?" He scratched his head. "Always been good. But it's too far from the fields. Never worth tapping." What if it was? Helen had a crazy but feasible idea. She recalled a farm she'd visited years ago that used a simple gravity-fed irrigation system with PVC pipes. It was cheap, effective, and could save the crop. "How far from here to the main garden?" she asked. "About 500 yards downhill." "Then it'll work." Helen grinned. "The water will flow on its own. We just need pipes." Mr. Tony looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Mrs. Helen, that'll cost money we don't have. It'll cost less than losing the whole harvest." That afternoon, Helen did something she never thought she would. She sold the gold ring from her first marriage, still tucked in a drawer. The money covered the pipes, fittings, and an extra hand for the job. James only found out when he saw the pipes arrive. "Where'd the money come from?" "She sold her ring," Rose blurted out. James went quiet for a long moment, then approached Helen. "You shouldn't have done that." "Why not?" "It was from the past. I'm building the future." He pulled her close and kissed her right there, in front of everyone, a long, desperate kiss full of gratitude and love. "I love you," he said for the first time. "I love you too," Helen replied, tears streaming down her face. Installing the pipes took 2 days. Helen, James, Mr. Tony, Rose, and 3 extra hands worked from dawn to dusk, digging trenches, connecting pipes, testing pressure. On the second day, when they opened the main valve, water gushed through the makeshift sprinklers. "It worked!" Rose shouted, clapping. "It worked!" Helen watched the water soak the dry soil and felt that maybe, just maybe, things could turn out all right. Friday arrived, cloudy and tense. Helen woke with a knot in her stomach, took a long shower, and chose her best dress, navy blue, serious yet feminine, and braided her hair in a low bun. She wanted to make the best impression possible. "You look beautiful," James said, appearing in the bedroom. "I'm terrified." "Me too." He adjusted his tie. "But we'll face it together." The community hall was packed when they arrived. Helen counted quickly. Nearly 60 people, mostly men, all eyes turning to her as she entered. The silence was deafening. "Good evening," James said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Good evening," a few voices replied half-heartedly. Mr. Gerald, the co-op president, banged his gavel. All right, folks, let's get started. Tonight's about our member, James Perry. We've heard concerns about, well, changes that don't align with our community's values. Helen's legs felt weak, but she stood firm beside James. What changes? James asked. You know damn well, a voice called from the back. Mr. Andrews, the buyer they'd sent away. Mail-order bride, a wife no one knows, a farmer turning baker. And worse, another voice added, losing the respect of serious buyers. James stepped forward. My personal life's none of your business. As for buyers, I haven't lost anyone's respect. I just won't be disrespected anymore. James, Mrs. Abigail said, standing from the front row, no one's trying to hurt you, but this community has rules, traditions. Your wife, she glanced at Helen. She's clearly a good person. But she's an outsider, doesn't know our ways, and she's changing you in ways that worry us. Helen knew it was her moment. She took a deep breath and stood. Can I speak? A murmur rippled through the room. Mister. Gerald hesitated. Well, that's unusual. Unusual is judging someone without giving them a chance to defend themselves, Helen said, her voice steady. Let her speak, someone shouted from the back. Yeah, let her, another agreed. Mr. Gerald sighed. All right, go ahead. Helen walked to the front of the hall, 60 pairs of eyes on her. Her heart pounded so loud she was sure they could hear it, but her voice came out clear and resolute. My name is Helen Perry. 6 months ago I arrived here broken, with nothing but the clothes on my back. James took me in, protected me, gave me a home. She paused, looking at her husband. And in return, I gave him everything I had. My dedication, my work, my love. Very touching, a sarcastic voice called. But what have you done besides cause trouble? Helen smiled. I'll show you exactly what I've done. She opened her bag and pulled out the ledger she'd found months ago. This is Willow Creek Farm's balance sheet when I arrived, she said, showing pages of red numbers. Piled up debts, one buyer lowballing us, overdue bills. A murmur spread through the hall. James looked at her, surprised. He didn't know she'd brought the ledger. And this, Helen continued, pulling out a folder, is the balance sheet today. She showed spreadsheets she'd prepared, income from cheeses and preserves, savings from the irrigation system, new buyers. In 6 months, the farm's income grew 40%. We paid off the most urgent debts, and for the first time in years, Willow Creek ended a month in the black. The hall was silent. Helen pressed on. You talk about tradition. I respect tradition. But tradition that kills a farm isn't tradition, it's stubbornness. I didn't come to change James. I came to help him save what he and his family built. What about the irrigation system? Someone asked. Installed this week. Using a spring we weren't tapping, cost less than $1,000 and will keep the crops watered through the drought. Mrs. Abigail stood again. Helen, no one doubts your ability or intentions, but things here work a certain way, have for generations. I understand, Helen said. That's why I brought one more thing. She pulled a map of the region from her bag. I marked every farm struggling right now. 12 properties that could use the same irrigation system we built. And families that could earn extra income with homemade goods. Helen walked to the wall and pinned up the map. I didn't come just to save Willow Creek. I came to help this whole community thrive. If you'll let me. The debate that followed was heated. Voices rose, arguments flew from all sides. Some defended Helen, others resisted, but she could feel the tide turning. It was Old Man Joe, one of the region's eldest farmers, who had the final word. Folks, he said, standing slowly, I'm 70 years old and seen a lot. Seen rich farms turn to dust. Seen proud families lose everything to stubbornness. And seen outsiders save what we thought was unsavable. He looked at Helen. Girl, you may not have been born here, but you've got the heart of this place. Anyone who helps this community grow is welcome in my book. The vote was close, but Helen and James won. By 3 votes, but they won. They left the hall hand in hand, under a sky finally unloading the rain the region had been praying for. We did it, Helen said, laughing and crying at once. We did, James agreed, kissing her in the rain. 3 months later, at the Harvest Festival, the community hall was decked with colorful streamers, the air rich with the scent of roasted corn and cornbread. A fiddle played a lively tune, kids darted between tables, and smiles were everywhere. Helen was in the kitchen, helping serve the preserves she'd made, now with recipes shared with other women in the community, when James appeared behind her. "Come here," he said, pulling her to the dance floor. "I don't know how to two-step," Helen protested. "I'll teach you," he said, guiding her to the center of the hall. It was their first dance together. James led her gently, whispering steps in her ear, laughing when she stepped on his toes. Helen felt clumsy, but overjoyed, completely, deeply happy. The music stopped, and Mr. Gerald tapped the microphone. "Folks, before we continue, we've got a special recognition," he announced. "Helen, come up here." Helen looked at James, surprised. He smiled and nudged her toward the makeshift stage. "Helen Perry," Mr. Gerald continued, "on behalf of this community, we want to thank you. Your irrigation project is now in 8 farms. Your workshops on homemade goods are bringing extra income to 15 families. And the co-op you proposed has boosted everyone's profits by 30%. The hall erupted in applause. Helen felt tears stream down her face, but they were tears of pure joy. "And more," Mrs. Abigail added, stepping to the microphone, "you taught us that tradition isn't about resisting change. It's about choosing the right changes." More applause. Helen scanned the crowd, seeing familiar faces. Mr. Tony, proud as if she were his daughter. Rose beaming, holding hands with a boy from town she'd started dating. Old Man Joe waving his hat. And in the middle, James, with the smile she'd grown to love. "Thank you," Helen managed, her voice choked. "When I got here, I was lost, hurt, hopeless. You gave me a chance when I didn't deserve one, welcomed me when I was a stranger, and loved me when I finally learned to love back." She looked at James. "James, on my first day, you made me a promise. You said no one would touch me here. Today I make that same promise to you, to this community, to this land I've learned to call mine. No one touches you without going through me first." The hall went quiet for a moment, then exploded in the loudest applause Helen had ever heard. The festival went late. Helen danced with James, with Mr. Tony, with Old Man Joe. She ate cornbread, sipped cider, laughed until her sides ached. And when they finally walked home, hand in hand under a starry sky, she knew she'd found what she'd been searching for her whole life without knowing. "Helen," James said, pausing at the farm gate. You changed everything. The farm, the community, me. You changed me too," she said, nestling into his arms. "You made me the person I always wanted to be." They stood there, wrapped in each other, listening to the night sounds of the countryside. The breeze through the orchard leaves, the chirp of crickets, the distant murmur of the creek now irrigating their fields. "James," Helen said finally. "I'm pregnant." He pulled back to look at her face. "For real? I found out yesterday. Wanted to tell you at the festival, but thought it'd be better like this, just us." James lifted her off the ground and spun her, laughing like a kid. "A baby," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." "Or baby girl," Helen teased, laughing. "Or baby girl," he agreed, kissing her. "They'll be born here, grow up on this land, know from the start they belong. Like their mama learned to," Helen said. They walked hand in hand to the house, past the garden she'd planted, the greenhouse they'd built together, the dairy where she made the cheeses that saved the farm. Every corner of that place told their story, of the woman who arrived broken and the man who welcomed her, of the love that grew slowly like a well-tended crop. On the porch, before going inside, Helen looked back one last time. The farm stretched under the moonlight, peaceful and prosperous. It was hard to believe that just a year ago she'd arrived as a desperate stranger. "What are you thinking?" James asked. "I'm thinking sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself," Helen said. "I'm thinking every tear, every fear, every hard moment was worth it." "Was it really?" Helen smiled, resting her hand on her still flat belly where their first child was growing. "Every second." They stepped into the house that was truly theirs, closed the door, and prepared for another dawn on the farm they'd saved together. Outside, the land rested under the morning dew, fertile and generous, ready for another day of work, another day of love, another day of the simple, full life they'd chosen. And in the quiet Kentucky night, the breeze carried through the valley the certainty that some love stories are so strong they transform not just 2 lives, but an entire community. Because true love, Helen had learned, isn't just about finding the right person. It's about finding the place you belong and having the courage to fight for it. Now she knew, with the certainty of crops sprouting in good soil, that she'd found both.